Good evening, wherever you are joining us. This is Living in Between Worlds. We are a community of diasporas of the world, first and second generation immigrants, here to gather for deep and meaningful conversations. And every week, this is a new time for us. Every Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You'll find us here either live or in a meetup where we discuss a topic. And today's topic is on staying true to yourself when you have family coming to visit you, or when you are going to go and visit with your family. It's something that is very prominent in most of our lives. And this is what I love about these conversations, is that whatever topic we end up choosing kind of ends up like relating to some aspect of where we are in our life, which I love, because we are able to have these conversations and be able to apply them to our life right away. And so if you feel like you are kind of living in between worlds, we invite you to come join us. Either here live next week. We have a virtual meetup where it's on Zoom, and we're just kind of behind closed doors, and we kind of dive deeper into each topic. And this week it's this topic. So I want to introduce Nuria and Sonia here with me. They are also part of the Living in Between Worlds community. And they are brilliant, and I just can't wait to dive into this topic. Sonia had actually come up with this topic, so I'll let her kick off.
Yay! Well, thank you for that introduction, and I'm really happy to be here today in this new schedule, which I'm still getting used to it. It's like the first time. It's kind of dark outside, but I'm looking forward to this new season. And I think actually I love what you said, Vanessa, about like how these topics are the best because they are, I mean, we get inspiration for these topics from what's happening in our real lives. And I mean, part of the reason why we also decided to change the time for our live streams and for the meetup and so on, it's because we noticed this trend that like in the summertime, we tend to get more busy with like social events, like family stuff and so on. So, which all of that realization that like, oh yeah, it's getting harder to like meet like sometimes like on Saturdays or during the week and so on. um that kind of like made me reflect on all this idea of like the busyness of the summer and the dynamics of the summertime. And at least here in Canada, I think this may vary depending on where you live in the world, but I find like in countries where you have like very specific seasons that change a lot, you have like a set of trends and rituals I find that tend to happen. And I've personally struggled a lot with the summertime as a period because I would get really, really overwhelmed. I always found that like it was like we have too many invitations, too many things going on, family coming over, like, and I mean, and the question was, how do I stay true to myself? How I originally wanted to call this, how do I survive this? Because when you're like in the middle of it, you can feel like really overwhelmed. And it's like, it's supposed to be a nice time of like, lots of activities and things and going on. But like when you're like a sensitive person, like I am, it can feel really overwhelming. So I wanted to talk about this and kind of see what's your like is this something you have observed as well? Let's begin with that. Like do you find it that the summertime and this period can get a little bit overwhelming? Like is this something that is just like my personal observation? I want to share like what have you seen either personally or in your circle of friends about this dynamic. I want to hear from you.
I can start. Thanks for sharing, because I think it's so true. Because like I look at my calendar right now and it's like it's completely booked up for most of the weekends, right? Like it's just, and it's so interesting because for me, I value my hermit time. Like I love being in, having alone time, and also getting out there and being with friends at the same time. So I noticed that I have to be super mindful to actually start blocking out time for myself so that it doesn't end up getting blocked out. So I'm very like strategic sometimes when it comes to saying yes to things. And it's just so interesting how like, yeah, summertime just seems like everybody wants to get out, especially with like the pandemic being kind of the restrictions are a lot more open now, and everyone is more comfortable with gathering together. This is, yeah, I think for me, it's been really interesting to kind of like, I just came back from a trip and visiting family in Ontario. And it was such an interesting experience for me, because for the first time, I felt like I was completely at peace, because normally when I think about going to visit family of any sort, or even just having, family dinners locally here, there's, when you talk about the overwhelm, for me, the overwhelm happens in my mind. It happens in the expectations that I start to kind of tell myself like, oh, okay, I'm expected, as the eldest daughter, I'm expected to be the one that makes all the plans. Or, if I'm traveling, I have to make sure that I'm see all the people. I have to make sure I fit everybody in, like, because it's like, got to make use of this precious time that, I'm traveling thousands and thousands of miles away. Right. So it's kind of like, there's that pressure of, the expectations, right? And really at the end of the day, these expectations is kind of just learned expectations, right? And I think for the first time, I had a little bit of drama before this trip where I was kind of like thinking, I'm going to like be okay with not seeing a few people. I'm just going to let it be okay. And, I had the drama of it, but then it totally panned out. Like I had the best time because I wasn't thinking about like having to like arrange, I have to see this person and then I've got to fit this other person, and how does traveling work? Because in Ontario, it takes like 5 hours to get from one city to the next, right? Like, so it was kind of like, it gave me that, like, I'm just, I felt like, okay, I understood where my overwhelm usually exists, and making decisions ahead of time to help myself to be at peace with being okay with not meeting all my own expectations of kind of what a good person would do, what a good traveler would do, a good family member would do. And even like hanging out with my family there wasn't like this expectation of like, oh, I have to like spend the whole evening with them. Like, it's okay for me to have dinner with them and then go to my room and rest after, right? Like there was just, even within those time frames of like giving myself the okay, like the permission to be like, okay, yeah, like it's okay for me to like be in the present moment and just enjoy and just receive. And it was fun, just like allowing, other people to kind of plan things and saying, yeah, I'm going to surrender this part and I'm just going to decide I'm going to have a good time no matter what. But definitely it has been a shift. Whereas in the past, it was very, like you said, overwhelming. It felt like, there was a lot of like, oh, I can't disappoint people. But once I let it go, it's kind of like, okay, I'm seeing how that actually works for me.
Thanks for sharing. Nuri, I want to hear. I have a couple questions for you, Vanessa, but go ahead,
No,
Nuri. I want to hear from
if you want to stick.
Ah, okay. Well, yeah. While we're on the topic, Vanessa, I'm totally just curious. Like what you just described was so like it just sounded so good, and I was curious to like hear more about like what do you think changed? Like, were you doing like specific kind of like mindset work or something before going on a trip? Because you said like for the first time I felt more present, and I'm kind of like I want to hear how you coach yourself through that. Like, what were you like? What changed? Like, what was your process? I'm curious.
Um, lately, it hasn't been just like, it's been more of a day to day thing where I'm just really noticing, am I actually putting a limitation on myself right now? Am I having to explain myself in this moment? Anytime I'm having to explain myself, justify anything, or anytime that I feel like I have an expectation of an outcome, that's where I've been doing this thing where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna let that go. I'm gonna release that. And it's not as easy as, like for me to just say and it's done. It's more just being completely intentional and pausing. And I've been working with spirit. I've been saying, really trusting in spirit's guidance and really trusting in spirit to say, hey, like, spirit's got the show. For me, I just get to like listen and follow and really practicing what that looks like. And I've noticed in that practice really how much I think I have control over things so it's helped me to actually notice how I don't actually have a lot of control over things. And anytime I'm like having an expectation, anytime I'm trying to explain myself, or anytime that I'm like expecting a certain outcome, I'm not being present, right? My mind is actually focused on the future. Or if I'm like thinking about my, a relationship or a conversation that I had, it's like I'm thinking about that and not actually being present moment. So for example, like the family that we were staying with, they have 3 kids, beautiful kids. Um, and I just completely, this time through, I completely connected with one of them. And it was just so beautiful to kind of watch our relationship kind of just unfold. And I could hear my brain kind of go to like, well, you're not spending enough time with the other kids. Like they're going to feel neglected, or they're going to feel like they're not getting enough time with you. And it's just like, okay, I'm hearing this talk and I'm just letting spirit like take care of that part. It's been so freeing for me to practice doing that, because then it's just like I'm just trusting that whatever is happening right now is so beautiful, and I wouldn't trade any of that. Like me and Max, we completely bonded and we had so much fun. We danced in the rain. We like just had all these beautiful moments, like conversations, like heart to heart. And he's just such a brilliant human being. And so I learned so much from him. And it was just kind of like, okay, this is the gift, like this person in front of me. So that's kind of how I've been experiencing this. And it's really worked.
Thank you for sharing. That is fascinating. Thank you.
So
Nuria.
for me, I think for me that this particular topic like brought up so many things, starting with it's okay, like changing, it's okay. Like the personal change, because probably you have incredible memories with one family member growing up, right? And then that family member wants to visit you, but it's not the same. Like probably the first 2 days you're making jokes and I remember when that thing happened and da da da, and yes, everything is the same, but it's not. Like really, it's not. And so when you drop off this topic, Sonia, I literally had to really look so close to say, how many times, as Vanessa was pointing out, how many times I've said yes when I don't want to, right? Like when this is my space, this is my time, but this guilt of, oh my God, but all my family lives in Mexico, right? So it's a great opportunity for them to come and not to see me, like to visit Canada, which is like also it could be a great conversation to have, right? Like, okay, do you want me to host you as an Airbnb? I can do that, right? But you don't have to pay. But I can do that, right? Without that commitment of I have to serve you. But also and curiously, I had like a friend asked me to stay at my place, and because it was convenient for her. She lives so far away, so she was visiting BC, and she needed a midpoint to visit different places that she has different appointments. Anyways, we changed a lot, and I realized that still I was like, okay, I gave my word. I said this is okay, right? For this number of days, but I was so uncomfortable because there were so many things that didn't work for me, that I felt like the line was crossing constantly. And also my daughters felt that. Like this doesn't feel good, right? And in my mind I was like, okay, this is gonna be the last time that this particular person is gonna be in my place for so long. Or but I couldn't say at the moment, this and that don't work for me, right? I was totally, and I was so aware that I was avoiding the conflict, like, but so much because, of course, I had also so many things on my plate that I didn't want to add an extra thing. Um, and then after that, I thought, you know what? I truly want to be surrounded by people that I love, like people that are in my universe, that I'm not longer willing to be the person who is like constantly providing favors, like, oh yeah, the cousin of a cousin of mine wants to visit Canada. Would you mind? I mind. Like, no, right? And embracing visitors that I really and truly want to be surrounded by. And curiously, those visitors are people that are so open and that have done so much personal development work that I can have the conversation of, yes, and mornings are hectic for me. Do your plan. Or that person can say, you know what, 2 days I'm not going to be at your place because I want to visit a different area of BC or whatever it is, right? And that both parties feel comfortable and in the space of building up more and more intimacy, because we were willing to say, how can we make it work where we both feel amazing? So I think I'm going to have just a couple of visitors because not everybody around me is on that level. But I really, I thought, Nuria, you're in that stage in life where you should honor what works and what doesn't work for you. And in the same way, it applies if I visit someone, right? Because it's not only on one way, it applies in both ways. Like, I have to be honest when I have to go to a particular place, and if I know someone who lives there, would you mind? Right? But respecting and always honoring the other end, because it's not only um, I'm not only compromising um, all the things that I'm building up in my personal development, but also I'm compromising the other person's development in case that it exists, right? Um, but yeah, it's what a topic.
I totally love that. And I definitely, there's this topic of kind of like um the willingness to have the hard conversation when it's a good fit. I mean, when it's, because I do find it that it's like on one end of the spectrum, like of course if we're always like, okay, you know what, like the minor inconvenience, like I'm not going to accept anyone, I'm not going to see anyone, that wouldn't be good. I mean, I speak for me, like that wouldn't be good either, in the sense that it would probably, I love spending time in my house by myself, kind of like in my environment. But of course, like if we get like too rigid with any rules, then it's like we don't see anyone. But then at the same time, um, there's that aspect of like, well, you know, being willing to have the hard conversation and be like, hey, you know, and I mean, by the way, this is something that it applies for like family visitors, but any other social relationship, you know, when you have like, I've seen it in my life too, where it's like, hey, you know, with my friends, like I prefer plans that are kind of like that finish early in the day, because I like to be home like relatively early and so on. And so um it's like this willingness to have the conversation. I find it's like that it's an important skill. It requires being willing to be uncomfortable, but also I think, like you said, Nuria, like it's that ability to have that conversation, it's very related also to like the, I would say like the level of like personal awareness or personal development that the person has. And in that kind of like in that vein, I was wondering, what would you think, and the question goes for you both, like what would you think are like some of the common like transgressions or the common kind of patterns that we see happening in like when it comes to these dynamics, and why we feel kind of exhausted sometimes? I would say for me, there is like something you said, Vanessa, like this belief that whenever someone visits or you visit somewhere, that you have to like see all the people. It's like this kind of like FOMO thing that you're like, I'm going to one city and I know like three people there, like maybe I should see them all. Or like this pressure of like let's just like squeezing as much as we can the time and the people and just fit everything so we can check the boxes. So that's one that I see, but I'm curious to see like what are some of this, yeah, like the transgressions or the triggers, or I mean, using that word like in the kind of like popular culture type of way. What do you think it's the what do you see as some of the trends that cause
Well,
this potential
I can
conflict?
go because I have these so fresh. Like, well, Vanessa as well, but uh, because I mean, in my case, I was the host, right? But I would say the transgression happens when, or when someone is expecting you to be the, you know, the tourist guide, or also when they say, don't worry about me, I can handle like everything by myself, right? And then you don't know if that person is going to show up at dinner time or not, or like you don't know, right? Like both sides are like quite extreme, right? um and also, you know, like food, or saying, hey, so should I pay for something, or you know, or it's all on you, or things like, how do you clean your house, right? Like you have a particular way of doing things. And I noticed that I have this from my grandma. Like she doesn't say things, she just does things, right? Like for it's her way to show people how she likes the things to be done. So I was doing the same thing, and that person didn't get the message, which was awful, right? Because of course wasn't clear. Um, but it goes from there to, you know, can I come to your place drunk? Is that okay? Right? Or I know there is a particular practice at home that, you know, it's important to say those things, to ask, right? Because I feel it's normalized, and it's like, okay, if you're visiting, you are allowed to do whatever you want, and the host has to, you know, hold back because you have to be kind. And just that is a transgression. Like, just assuming that that's how each role performs is a transgression. and and it's invisible. I think that transgression is really invisible.
I think, Nuri, you totally hit it on the point there. Like this idea of a silent assumption of roles, right? Like you're okay, there's the host and then the tourist, right? So it's like, as a host, and I feel like for me, like it was very much like that before. I've had visitors where it's like, oh my gosh, someone's coming and like immersing themselves in our daily life. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we have to like change everything, instead of allowing ourselves to actually know this is like our daily life is like this. And this person is actually in merging in our world. And it's so important to have that open conversation of like, this is like, I like to see it as like a partnership of like, hey, this is how I work. How do you work? Right. And, yeah, if you're like Sonia, you like to get all of your stuff done in the mornings, and then, I hear I'm the same, then okay, then we know that works. Let's plan something for all the mornings. Or maybe I'm more of like, I like to sleep in. Okay, so maybe we're working on like afternoons, late afternoons, but like early enough, right? So it's like having that compromise. But I think it's really like that hidden assumption of like, this is what my role is and this is what your role is, and not having that conversation is where it gets uncomfortable.
And I would add that it's way more uncomfortable when you are not really close to that person. Right? Like when someone asks you, hey, my cousin is coming to town, would you mind?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I don't want to compromise both relationships, right? So it's
right.
Yeah.
It's like you're representing, right? Like you're like, oh, I'm representing my cousin here. I've got to put on this, like, I've got to give her face, and I've got to actually be a good human being in front of the stranger.
Because also, you know what, just to add, I love my dog. Like my dog, well, it's not my dog. It is my husband's dog, but I stole it. So I love her. I just love her. And if someone comes to my place and is not pet friendly, I cannot handle it. Because for me, the dog is like a family member, right? Like it's like, so at the moment that I see a person that is like, hey, it's like, no, right? And those tiny things become aggressions. Like, no, like you are the one coming to my place. The dog lives here, right? So you have to deal with my dog.
That is so true. And like it's so funny that like in this group we're all pet friendly, because like it's I mean it's basically the same for me. And it's so funny that you mentioned that, Maria, because I had not noticed my discomfort with that, but now that you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, I have felt like that, yeah, like that annoyance, or that kind of like, and I mean and sometimes it's like people that like I really appreciate, but it's always like a bit of like a thing. I mean, the way I kind of we kind of like work it around, like let's say if we have a friend who's like more I don't know, scared or whatever, like we might just decide to like hang out at a restaurant or like a more like neutral place. There are definitely workarounds. But yeah, it's so funny that like when we're talking about these things, we're really like how do you say, like unpacking the little rules that that make up our daily lives. And I find personally, I have a bit of a rule, I mean, unspoken rule, but like my husband seems to agree as well, that like we don't have a lot of space to host people in our house. And like during the pandemic, we were like, yeah, we should move to a bigger place, blah blah blah. And then part of it's like, no, I gotta like be that person who's like, sorry, I don't have an extra room to host anyone in, so I guess you can stay at my place. But I think it's so important to know ourselves, to be honest with ourselves, and to kind of, yeah, like you said, be like, yeah, like these are my rules, these are my preferences, and when you come into my house, like this, this is my space, and so on. But it's so funny that, I mean, we talk about this like, we're laughing and everything, but honestly, I don't know about you, but doing that work of like setting boundaries, or being like, no, you can do this here, or like, no, I will not host, blah blah blah, it can be so hard, because I find like, as I don't know, I mean, of course I don't speak for like all immigrants in the world, but I kind of grew up with the vibe of like, you're supposed to be a good host. Like you're supposed to be like super, like you're supposed, I don't know. I grew up with this idea, which is totally, now that I think about it, I'm like, it's like a thing in the back of my mind that just exists as a concept of like, you're supposed to be a nice host. But it's like, yeah, what does that even mean? And like, what are your, yeah, what are your rules? But yeah, it's so funny because everything that we're talking about, like setting boundaries, so kind of against some of the cultural norms we have been programmed with. Like, I don't know, like in your experience, what do you think of that?
Oh my God, you're so right. I feel like it comes a lot, of course, it's cultural, but it comes a lot, it's a lot related to serving, right? Like it's serving, you're serving other people, you're serving, you're in debt all the time. So if your uncle visited your other uncle, now you are in debt with that other uncle. It's so you didn't ask for that favor, but now it's yours because you are representing, as you mentioned at the beginning. So I think it comes from this cultural expectation of serving others. And yeah, it's just um, but again, I would have like, it's so important, first of all, to be aware of those things, and second of all, to have the conversation, like as you said, like first off, you and your husband, right? Like, no, we don't need a bigger space, like we're okay here, right? And this is how we hang out, and no, right? And in my case, for example, I love to host events, I love to host people in my house, I love it, I truly love it. But today I realized that I'm not willing to host anybody, like it has to be someone that at the moment that person knows that when I am opening my house, it's because my heart is already open for that person, because that person already lives in my heart, right? So, and I can see the difference, because when it comes from that place, that person is not expecting me to serve him. It's just sharing and communicating, and that's the commitment, right? Like the respecting of one another. And I can see, yeah, I can see the differences if I think about like that visitor I told you I had a couple of weeks ago, that was, the energy didn't flow. I was like, I don't feel that I am on my place. What if I go to bed earlier today? Just because I didn't want to come across with a person, which was just ridiculous. And on the other hand, like my mom is gonna come to visit me and well visit us, but I said visit me. So I'm super excited. I'm happy. I'm like having conversations with her, and it's like every single thing. It's amazing because we know that we're gonna create an incredible experience for everybody, and we can talk about things that don't work for us. But that's not easy to have with everybody because the majority of people are waiting for you to serve in one way or the other.
Yeah, Nuria, you had mentioned like this idea of like I think this is the thing with my culture, or I can't speak for all Chinese Canadians, but I kind of grew up in this aspect of like it's really an honor to serve somebody, honor to receive someone in your home. Like it's a big deal in our culture where it's like, okay, yeah, you really do like turn your house inside out and you like do all these things to your place, and you make sure you have all the food and you got to like plan all your meals, and like you're really like being in service to this person. And it really is an honor to have this person in your space. And I think this is where it comes back to kind of what you were sharing, Nuria, like truly being in love with the person that you are welcoming in, right? Like, I think that's so key. It's like, for me, it's like when I am truly in the presence of people that I love, it's just easy for that. Like it's natural to serve. It's natural to end up like doing all the things that, are kind of like textbook being a good host is all about. And I think that there's that one aspect of like, okay, yeah, there's this, it's an honor to be able to serve, and I'm not on my high horse. Like this person is being welcomed into my home. And there's that aspect. And then there's the aspect of, okay, forcing myself to serve someone that I don't really want to, do all the things for, right? And so that's where it's like, oh, then using kind of our traditions to kind of pressure ourselves, to force ourselves to, or motivate ourselves to do it. It's like, okay, yeah, this is where it's like, I'm supposed to do all these things. And it just does. And that's where it doesn't feel in complete alignment. But I think that's where it's like first recognizing, do I truly love and want this person? Like being honest with myself. And if I don't, then being willing to say, yeah, having that hard conversation as to, okay, well, this is my limits. Here are my boundaries, right? Like this is what I want. And yeah, I think it's beautiful to honor that piece of like, yeah, I'm welcoming someone home into my home. And then there's that aspect of like honoring my own kind of wants and desires and acknowledging that as well.
Definitely. And I think I definitely like that idea, what you mentioned earlier, of like being being so aligned with that person, or like being so in love with that person that you are hosting, that you're receiving. I think definitely that's like almost like a kind of like a quick test for you to see like, okay, is this someone that I really that I really want to see, that I really want to host? And based on the answer to that question, then also even when you have to have like a hard conversation or something, it's still going to be, I don't know, it's still going to be like worth it, because you will want to, you will want to have something work, right? So I think there's definitely that factor of like, who's the person that, that's coming, like what's your relationship to them, like why do you want to see them, blah blah blah. But I think there's also that second aspect of like, the activity and the environment, because I think both things play in both things have like a have an impact on like your overall feel of the things, because I can think of like some friends that I have that I probably prefer like seeing them more like, let's say, for a hike or for something like that, and there are other friends that I prefer like seeing them like in my place, and like, because I don't know, we can listen to music and kind of like chat like that and so on. So I think there's also that exercise I think that one has to do, in that um you also have to like take note of like what are your preferences when it comes to like environment and activities and so on. Like you said, things like, are you someone who likes to do things more in the morning or in the evening? Like, do you really, like, for example, I take a lot of pleasure in like organizing things, and for me that is something that's not an issue. Like, in fact, someone tells me like, hey, can you help me like organize a trip or something like that, I'm like, oh my god, yes, I have so many ideas, all of that. But I think it's not like there's any activity that's like inherently exhausting or bad or whatever, because yeah, it takes a lot of self-awareness, really. I remember like I was having a conversation with my mom because my sister and her family from Spain are coming, and they're staying at my parents' house. And in my head, I'm looking at that and I'm like, I'm already exhausted just from the fact of like, if I were to receive a full family in my house, I'm already like more than exhausted. But my mom's different. And she's kind of like, I'm like super glad that they will get to come. And she's kind of like cleaning the whole house and rearranging things. And I was talking to her, and part of me wanted to kind of like jump in there and kind of be like, no, but you have to set boundaries and blah, blah, blah. But then I was also kind of like, holding back a little bit, because I'm like, wait, she's not asking for that. Maybe there's not a problem. And I remember she said something like, yeah, and I think I'm gonna buy like a bed from IKEA. Like, like my sister was going to like buy a bed and blah blah blah. But I'm like, in my head, I'm like, wow, that is so exhausting. And I'm like, well, someone has to like build, like assemble the bed. And in my head, I was like, this is such a problem. I was already like, and she's kind of like, she was laughing because she's like, I didn't even think of that as like as a problem. And I just thought it was so funny because like it shows how like different the views can be, and how it's important to really tune in with yourself instead of just letting yourself be guided by what another person finds exhausting. You should find it exhausting too. I find that like that's very, yeah, it's very tricky, because in my head I was almost like, I was like, no, 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 there's no way you find building an IKEA bed like not exhausting. I'm like, come on, let's be real here. And she was genuinely like, this is not a problem for me. And I was like, wow, fascinating. So yeah, I think it's the people who's coming, your relationship with them, that is something to kind of to think about, but also the your preferences around like what things naturally energize you, what things naturally exhaust you, like what things you prefer like not doing, what things you like doing, and kind of, yeah, and kind of playing with those things, I find. What do you guys think?
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I it comes from be real with yourself, saying what is um it's just like when you mentioned your mom and the things that would be exhausting for you is not for her. Like same thing happened with me and my daughters, right? Like we three have this tendency of, okay, we're gonna make it work and we're gonna make that person feel comfortable even when we don't want that person to come. And I think that's probably we do more things for those people that we don't want to receive than for those who are like looking forward to see, right? So yeah, I'm just, like catching myself right now, like, like, ah, right? Because it's, uh, yeah, like when a relationship matters to you, it's tricky. It's tricky. It's so tricky, right? Because of course you love your sister, and you're not like, I don't want to see her, of course, right? But it's, don't expect me to do certain things, right? And just I remember that, for instance, my mom, not my mom who's coming, my other mom, she's like, probably for you, Nuria, this is annoying, but you are gonna come and help, like regardless. So even though I'm not hosting, like, no, you're gonna come because we're like the family, the nuclear family who is hosting. So it's it's not optional, and it's just, you feel more like, oh my god, now I'm mad at my sister, right? Like, because I didn't want to do this and I am doing it anyways, right? And um I with this topic I totally can see how much I betrayed myself in the past by allowing others others rules to control my house, um, just to avoid the conflict and find
Mhm.
that midpoint. Yeah, it's not you, mom. I'm looking forward. Actually, she's bringing us lots of things, lots of treats. She got a massive list.
That is so cool. But yeah, no, but it takes practice, like you said. And I think the point, it's not to like, I mean, like with any like personal awareness, personal development work, like it's not something like one day you're like, my boundaries are all perfect and I never people please and like I just do things like perfectly. No, of course, like I think that's really not the point. But I think, yeah, it's just so interesting to kind of look at those things. And many times we realize, like after the fact, like in the summer usually, it's like there will be one point where I'm probably going to overbook myself like one weekend. And then, like, on the Monday or the Tuesday, I will be like, and then I will realize, like, oh, that was like one too many activity. Like that was like, I saw like more people than I energetically was ready for. Um, but I think what has changed for me too is that I I observe that better. And yes, sometimes you can take more like proactive actions, such as saying no or saying yes, I will be happy to see you, but just don't stay at my house for like 7 days, or like things like that, like to arrange for like a middle ground. Um, but like, so yeah, sometimes I can be proactive, but other times too, I think what changes too is that we get to observe it like with more compassion, kind of thing, where you're like, yeah, of course sometimes we still like people please, and of course like the effects of cultural conditioning or family conditioning, it's not like we can just like turn off the button and just be like, that would practically feel like, I don't know, doing like brain surgery on someone or something. And that's like, maybe that's not even the idea. Like the idea is not to be the perfectionistic one way or another, right? I think. What do you think, Vanessa?
No, you bring up such a great point. And it was something that you had said earlier too, that this whole aspect of like test, like our lived experiences. We call these lived experiences because we're here to experience it, right? Like, and I think it's important for us not to fear these encounters, and if anything, to invite it as an experiment, invite it in as a way to, let's test it this time. Like my ability to go on this trip to be completely in presence didn't happen overnight, right? Like it happened over multiple times. I've been to Ontario many times, right? And every single time it's being willing to, after it all kind of happens, right? However it unfolds, to be able to kind of have that self-reflection and be able to say, okay, this is what worked for me and this is what didn't work for me. And next time I'm going to be a little bit more conscious about setting certain boundaries, right? And, even with inviting house guests, right? Like, I used to, drop everything, clear my schedule in order to like serve this person in my home. But it's like, really kind of like after time, really acknowledging, being true to yourself, really, and not like honoring what is true for you and what works for you. And I think this is where it's like allowing yourself, like you said, Sonia, just having that compassion of like, you're not going to be able to in the moment all the time be able to like speak up, the people pleasing is going to happen, and just allowing it to be and just being kind of, curious about it. Oh, this happened. Let's see, this is how it went down and this is how I felt about it. So do I want to continue feeling this way? Or, next time, do I actually kind of want to change things up a bit here, right? With my experience with this person, maybe this time I don't offer my house to them anymore, right? Because it was a very uncomfortable exchange. And, and in this aspect, I don't actually want to have this person in my home anymore, right? Like, and making decisions based on your experiences, right? And I think this is what I love about these conversations, because it really is like unraveling kind of like the all the different rules, right? Like putting up all the rules. Okay, here's the rule that we're going to talk about today. And then kind of bringing ourselves back to, this is what it's like to be human. And, we have this conditioning, and allowing ourselves to have it, to experience it, not to beat ourselves up for having these traditions, for having these upbringings that don't work for us. It's just being able to kind of say, this is our human experience. We're here to actually like come back to what's true for me, and what's true for me is going to be different than what's true for Nuria or what's true for Sonia. So it's like, it's going to look different for everyone. Like I'm going to feel exhausted when I overcommit here, right? And it's like, okay, I'm going to honor that for next time. I'm just going to reel back the yeses in this one aspect. And, maybe I want to kind of like say, okay, let's not plan anything. Let's just chill. Can we just chill and do nothing, and just being with each other is already enough. And I think coming back to that one question that you had asked previously, like, what's the kind of like baseline for me? It's like, the baseline is, I know I'm meeting this person and we're going to have a beautiful connection. And that's all my expectation is. And if I'm going to visit them, they're allowing me to stay in their home, I'm happy to have a bed, right? Like that's kind of like the minimum baseline. It's like here, and if you're coming to visit me, I will provide you a bed. Maybe I'll give you some fancy towels. Right? But that's kind of like the minimum. And then everything else is just like bonus, right? So I know we're wrapping up for time, but I just want to offer, like, anyone want to say anything else before we wrap up here? This is so awesome. This is why we invite all of you to come join us. Next week, we are meeting at the same time, Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific. I have to get used to the new times, 8 p.m. Eastern. We're meeting here on Zoom. Again, it's not going to be streamed live like this. It's an intimate room. We're here just to open our hearts and dive deeper in the very same topic. We would love to hear your experiences. Let us know if you resonate with any of this, and maybe you have some experiences that you'd love to share with us, we'd love to have you there and share. So we look forward to seeing you there. Everything's in the description. Thank you, ladies. I love you.
Thank you. Thank you. Fun conversation.
Have a great evening. Okay, ciao.